Hi everybody, welcome back to the McLuhan Institute, TMI Live number 32, if I have the numbers right, and I may or may not. Welcome back. It's been a while. I had, I said all this elsewhere in the sort of newsletter on the Patreon page, patreon.com/McLuhan. I'd sort of suspended the TMI Live broadcast for a while. Short story, I'm back. So I'll be here again every Tuesday night for hopefully the foreseeable future, where I'm in the midst of cataloging this library. This is the library of Eric McLuhan. He passed away coming up on 2 years ago now. And I am in the process, don't let that die. I'm in the process of making an inventory, something of a catalog, a documentation, and let's see, I'm almost at 500 entries, so I've estimated around 6,000 books, which takes me, closing in on 10% of the way. It doesn't sound like very much. It's not. Thank you all for joining me now or in the future, which is your present and is my past, as the case may be. I appreciate you and appreciate your interest here in this thing that I'm doing. Where I am at in the library is over here. These are the McLuhan shelves, and it's this case and actually this entire case, top to bottom, 6, I think, shelves, maybe 7, full of all the McLuhan books that my dad collected. They include books that he wrote or had a hand in. Mainly it's the works of Marshall McLuhan, and it goes from Marshall's PhD thesis, of which there's a typescript, up into the last things he published before he died. And includes things that were published after he died, things like Laws of Media, which my father Eric co-wrote with Marshall, which was published in 1988, Media and Formal Cause, which was an edited collection of essays by Marshall and Eric, 2011, and the books my father published a little later, Cynic Satire, Electric Language, Sensus Communis, things like that. So this is where our copies of McLuhan books are, and that's where I'm at in my inventory. When I last left off, I had done the top shelf, and I'm down to the second. And what I usually do in this broadcast is I sometimes talk for a few minutes if I have something to say. Otherwise, I just do my thing, and you're here with me. So hey, Say Rain, nice to see you. Greg, awesome. First thing I picked up on that shelf, so the shelves are so full that they're the books laid out like this, and then there's sometimes things stacked on top. I'm dealing with the first stack on top of the actual shelves. And first up is a paperback copy of From Cliché to Archetype, which you don't see very often. It's kind of interesting. Marshall McLuhan with Wilfred Watson, From Cliché to Archetype. McLuhan at his best, using his erudition and incredible command of sources, playing with words to isolate ideas, arriving at essence by altering the angle of view, McLuhan compresses broad comprehension into succinct aphorism. Quote, paradox is the posture of the mind when, like a boxer balanced on 2 feet, it is feinting for an opening. The more the databanks record about each one of us, the less we exist. New means create new ends, as new services create new discomforts. From Cliché to Archetype was originally published by the Viking Press, Incorporated. This is 1971. The original is 1970. This is a really unusual book. If you've never come across it before, it's graphically very interesting. This copy is really pristine, so rather than use that as to demonstrate. I pulled a copy. Upstairs here, this is the downstairs. In the upstairs we have everything that goes in our McLuhan bookshop, which is still at ericmcluhan.com. There's also a link on the mcluhaninstitute.com where we have lots of extra copies of things like the original hardcover Cliché to Archetype. And as I said, this is a really interesting book. I don't know the whole story. It's co-written with Wilfred Watson. And it took several years to make, and I don't know the whole story behind that. I'm sure there are people out there who could fill in the blanks. I don't know enough to really talk about it. But as I said, it's visually really interesting, typographically. Is there a subtitle on this? No, it's just From Cliché to Archetype, which is interesting in itself. There's several interesting things about this book. Compositionally, it starts out, the chapters run alphabetically. So the first chapter is Absurd, the theater of the. Very strange. And as you progress through, the chapters from there it goes to Anesthesia, Archetype, Centennial Metaphor, Cliché is Probe, Cliché is Breakdown, Consciousness, Emotion, Sentiment. Anyway, jokes. The table of contents for this book is not in the front, as you would imagine, but it's under T. Parody, Public as Cliché, Rag and Bone Shop, Retrieval. We'll talk about that in a second. Table of contents, right near the back. Retrieval. This is interesting. This is 1970, but when Marshall and Eric were working on what would become Laws of Media, they came up with the first 3 laws fairly quickly. Enhance, obsolesce, and reverse, if I'm getting this right. Retrieval, I think, took a little longer, and they realized that this book, From Cliché to Archetype, was all about retrieval, and there's that chapter in there on retrieval, which is very interesting. I also pulled, this is fun, Derek de Kerkhoff did a French translation, Cliché d'Archetype, I think, l'Archetype, of which we have cases for French people out there. This is a fun thing. This is the presentation author's copy. Back when, in the good old days of publishing, when you published a major book, the publisher often sent you a leather-bound author's copy, which is very nice. This has Season's Greetings from the Viking Press inside it, and it's just like the hardcover, except it's been bound in leather, which is very nice. And I also pulled, what year is this? This is a modern reprint, Cliché to Archetype, by Ginkgo Press, right, 2011. And they made some changes. They made it sort of squarish, changed the typography a little bit, and with apologies, they messed up a little bit because rather than stick to the tradition of the book, they put the editor's introduction at the front instead of under E, which is by rights where they should have put it. And they also add an index in the back. Again, should have put it under I, and acknowledgements, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, that would be my beef with that, but whatever. So allow me to put these aside, and we'll get to work. I've already wasted about 10 minutes blathering at you. I should actually get to some work. I gave this broadcast the funny name of Escape from COVID-19. I've been thinking a lot about that situation. It's a very rich subject for media study, especially McLuhan studies. And there's a little article on my medium.com page under my name, Andrew McLuhan, if you want to read some of my thoughts on it, of which I tried to put some of the things I've learned about McLuhan work to test against it. It's real interesting times. So, without further ado, here comes the boring stuff. Hopefully this is working. It looks like it's working. I know a lot of people are doing live streams right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if we run into tech glitches. Just to repeat in case you don't know what I'm doing here, I've been through this before. 10 years ago or so, I did the same work with Marshall McLuhan's library, and so I have a bit of experience. So I'm making a note of the location on the shelves, of the title, of the author, hardcover, softcover, the condition of the book, the bibliographic data, so the publisher, the year, and then where it's applicable, I make a note. Often Marshall or Eric would write inside where they purchased it, sometimes sign their name, and then I take a spin through and look to see if there are any notes, annotations, little things included inside, which there often were, but aren't in this case. So I'll spend a couple minutes here doing what I do. From Cliché to Archetype. Marshall McLuhan. Wilfred Watson, who was married to Sheila Watson. Paperback. It's in good condition. Christian Science Monitor gets the blurb, a stimulating and revealing view of art, literature, history, life. Just as an aside, as I spent the last week thinking about pandemic and COVID and virus, I've been trying to think of instances where Marshall or Eric talked about those things, a pandemic or a virus, as an agent of change. And nothing immediately jumped to mind, which meant I didn't have any, quotes to throw out there. Maybe somebody watching this will help me find something. The only thing I could find that immediately sprang to mind was from Understanding Media, the first chapter, The Medium is the Message, when Marshall says, I'm in the position of Louis Pasteur, trying to tell people that their greatest enemy is quite invisible to them, quite unseen. And he goes on in that vein. But it's interesting, whereas COVID-19, coronavirus, okay, now we could get into a discussion on whether or not it's man-made, a human technology, or, altered by humans or whatever. But for the sake of argument, let's say that it's not. This is a rare instance of something that isn't of human origin having such a huge effect on humanity. And it is because of its effect that it's a valid objective media study, because media study, McLuhan studies, looks at the environmental effects of technologies, or even in this case, things of non-human origin. So we could possibly look at the effect of a giant meteor hitting the Earth or something in a media studies lens. But generally that wasn't the case, and Marshall and Eric, maybe Eric mostly, are very firm on the fact in laws of media that the laws of media, what does this situation enhance, obsolesce, retrieve, flip into, are only useful in studying human objects. They're not useful for looking at spider webs or beaver dams or, Venus flytraps or whatever. And when you start to ask those questions of them, they kind of fall apart. But this is something else. So anyway, that's all very interesting to me. Well, I won't bore you with all these details this time. Maybe we'll get to some more real inventory next week. Just on a closing note, I want to say that I hope you're all taking care of yourselves and each other. And if you need help, ask. If people are checking in on you, be honest with them and tell them if you need help. And that's the way we're going to get through this. And we are going to get through. And everything is going to be different. But I think it'll be okay. So here's from me and the McLuhan Institute and the McLuhans to you and yours, wishing you all the best. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And maybe we can ask St. Patrick to pretend COVID-19 is a snake and get it out of here. Okay, peace, guys. Now I have to figure out how to end this.